Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today is a big day for the Rich Communication event here at MEF Connect Rich Communications. We have multiple things to talk about, but do not leave us. The next 40, 50 minutes are very important, not just about what's happening in the industry, but one of the key determinations of the future success of business communication, security. So securing rich communication. Now, I'm very glad to say that we've got here 5 illustrious speakers, some of those that could really say they have built the present, the past, and the future of rich communication. So without further ado, a small intro starting, as I can see, one screen at a time, but Chris Drake, the CTO of iConnective. Hello, Chris. I can see Robert Gersman, the chief evangelist and co-founder of Cinch, I believe, as well as vice chair of MEF. Some more illustrious titles to add to that. Steve Stipnick, CTO of Interop. Hello, Steve. And one of those players that make sure that RCS in this case is and much more is delivered to you. We do have Cliff Holzenbeck, the Senior Director of Product Development at iConnective. Hello. Hi, Cliff.
Oh.
And Oscar Gallego joining us from Vodafone. And Oscar is a technology and product director at Vodafone. You would know him as many things as being one of those original developers of the RCS content, but right now he does much more across all the IP communication services at Vodafone. So great to have you. As I can see, a lot of familiar faces for people that are within the rich communication business, and talking of a very important topic in general. As I say, securing rich communication is a big thing for us all. I will just start the dance, if you want, with some numbers from MEF. We calculate the number of email monthly users, as in people rather than users, as 1.6 billion, which is a big number, definitely a big number. But there was a primary communication channel, and then partly because security, fraud, and bad messages, we've now seen it not growing, actually going back in terms of usage. In comparison to SMS, it's got 3 billion users, or even OTT more recently, but it got 2.5 billion users monthly, or active users that send and share messages. So here we go, a bit of a lessons from the past. You know, trust is important. You need to have a secure channel to communicate with, and so much more if business has to be transacted over it. Well, first question, though, and a very important one, would be how do you build trust into a communication channel? And maybe starting with Cliff as well, as you're closed through iConnective and you work as a supplier and developer of solutions. How do you start building trust?
Sure. I think and I know we had a slide, if we could bring that one up, that would be beneficial at some point, because we can talk about it more at a macro level. But there are multiple avenues in which trust really gets built into an ecosystem. And it kind of starts with looking at a good governance model. So this would be the kind of the rules of the road that are established when you administrate an ecosystem. So these would be things like regulatory, industry guidelines, some of the things that the folks we're all working on as part of MEF. Other things that would kind of generally accepted behavior in any ecosystem would kind of fall under the governance model. Laws kind of falls under that regulatory piece. Then secondarily is there's things like monitoring. Monitoring is actually critical. This is the policing of the governance channels that have been, or governance policies that have been established. So making sure that the rules of the road are followed. kind of checking on those who participate and make sure that they're doing what they said that they would be doing. Third is the actual presentation of the content. And again, this is, speaking at it from a macro level, the content could be, an SMS or an MMS message. It could be, a television commercial. It could be a picture. It could be anything that, and obviously in this case, it could be an RCS communication that's been established. And so the presentation matters, because if it's polished and it looks good, the user is more likely to look at it, trust it, and accept it. There's also the medium. What is how is the information, or what channel is it being presented over? If it's television, right, is it over a legitimate station, or is it over local access, for example? I'm more likely to trust the message that comes across in my native messaging app than maybe one that, some obscure, OTT application. So again, the medium that this information is presented actually matters to us as consumers, and it matters to the brands as well that want to participate and display the content. And then lastly, who is the presenter? If it's coming from a big brand like Tesco or State Farm, or any large brand that's doing business, I'm more likely as a consumer to trust it. But really, all of these, again, at a macro level, all of these elements that go into creating trusted content, really it boils down to the experience of the user who's viewing the content, and the experience of others. Because not only when I look at content and I have all of these factors that have played into it, my trust level will be directly influenced by those that are around me. So if my friends start talking bad about something, then I'm more likely to abandon that particular channel. So I think we have an opportunity, especially with RCS out of the gate, to get this right, to make sure that we get all of those elements I just mentioned right out of the gate. And I think this will ultimately build to a trust model that works well for RCS for years to come.
Trust model for RCS. Let me ask then, Chris, some of our viewers right now might wonder, how is the RCS trust model then different from the SMS trust model? How do you reflect on those?
That's a great question. And security's been built into RCS from day one, right? So we've been involved in the GSMA standards. The connections are authenticated. They're essentially nailed up between senders, business senders, or their agents, people on this call, and the platforms that the mobile operators run. They're authenticated connections, and they tie the connection to the identity of the chatbot with a secure trust token. So you cannot impersonate anything that has such a cryptographic secure credential to identify itself as trusted. So that's critical. These two facets work together very closely, and should be able to keep bad actors out of the system. I just want to stress one thing around what Cliff said. Trust is in the eye of the beholder, which is the end user, and trust is earned over time by good experiences. And unfortunately, trust is lost very fast to a bad experience that goes viral, in a sense. So we have to be very careful to implement the GSMA standard as designed, because you may find implementations a little less rigorous, in which case there will be vulnerabilities that get exploited. So critical that all the parties in the ecosystem deploy the GSMA standard for rich business messaging the way it's designed, and to keep the bad actors out.
Well, you mentioned some of the implementations and indirectly the operator. So I will jump and ask a question to Oscar as working at Vodafone. What's your view in terms of what trust represents and what the role of the MNO in trust in this case?
I think there are several aspects. The first is we are the technical providers of the infrastructure that delivers messages to the users, be it the legacy technologies, SMS, MMS, and in the technologies we are using nowadays, like RCS. So we need to make sure that we take all the necessary steps to protect the infrastructure against any security threats, as well as protect user privacy. That comes first. And I think in general, the role of the operator should be to make sure that those partners and customers that are making use of the system, be it end customers or be it partners and business partners, at the end of the day, they are using it correctly. And I don't think that's an imposition that is by walking the path together. And as Cliff quoted before, I mean, it's very easy to pollute one channel. I don't want to put examples. We all have seen what happened in the last couple of years with social media. So actually, we should work together to make sure that only the right content and unrefutable partners are working with us. Here in the core, we have many of them, so surrounded by excellent people. And I would say that there is one aspect that we need to bring. At the end of the day, security is not only securing the transaction, but making sure that customers are talking to the right person. And while in peer-to-peer operators can play a pivotal role to make that happen, I think when we are talking about business transactions, we need to make sure that we create an ecosystem where a brand can protect their property, their biggest property from a point of view, which is the brand itself. Okay, and to create a way that it can do it simply and coordinated without the need of having to do it for each single operator in the world. And I think both the standards, the GSMA, UP specifications, they provide ways. And I know that there are several companies in there. I mean, today we have iConnective here, which I'm well aware of one potential solution in there. So there are many others. So at the end of the day, what we foresee is like if we adopt this standard that has been defined on how we can federate in the recognition of the brand and protecting the brand, then we are going to have a protected ecosystem because we are going to make sure, A, that brands get not impersonated, okay? Then the second one is more important, that customers don't get misled to talk to the wrong end. They are talking to the brands with the products and the goods they love the most. I think those are the three aspects, and I think we are doing a great job as a community of operator and as a community of standard partners working.
Yeah, and if I could chime in real quick, I couldn't agree with Oscar and Cliff more. You know, we believe at Interop and in our partnership with Cineverse that we're currently working on, that the whole bot vetting process or content vetting process, along with the concept of an independent vetting service, are crucial to the industry. I mean, we've seen in the internet space, right, for many, many years, this very similar mechanism being used in order to have an independent verification authority. In the internet world, it was one of Cliff's old companies, VeriSign, and then GoDaddy and a whole bunch of other folks that are doing that. But what we need to do is be able to secure the ecosystem from that vantage point. I'm also a firm believer that we need to secure or should allow individual users to be able to authenticate back to the business as well. I think that will open up a whole other avenue of available transactions that healthcare, banking, things along those lines that can be done. But in the short run, I think really we need to move from a model where individual operators are authenticating bots or content on their own network for their own behalf to what Oscar was talking about there, which is a kind of a federated system in which you can use an independent verification authority of your choice
but that those tokens and are shared, or certificates are shared across the community and across map platforms.
Chris, we heard from Stephen in the direct call for an international and independent approach to that. Would you say that other MNOs would be open to that level, to that idea?
Absolutely. Based on our engagement with various MNOs around the world, both or also in the gold markets, also in Americas, also in Asia, that's pretty much a consistent position, although there are definitely exceptions to that. I think we have a few different opinions on how independent verification could play out. It remains to be seen which one takes the center stage, or it may end up varied by country, perhaps a region. But yes, it's very important to have the ability for an independent verification of a brand, and that only such verified brands are allowed on the channel, and that they also have that authenticated connection that ties this authentication of the brand and the token, as Steve referred to it, back to the connection and the content traveling over it. This is absolutely critical, and will allow us all to keep the bad actors from impersonating legitimate brands.
Yeah, I would add to that and say that, that specifically on the other side of the coin is the brands and enterprises that we've talked to have consistently said that they want to be able to, and this is, I think, to Steve's point, is that when a brand submits or registers and goes through the vetting process, they would like to have as much coverage as possible out of that particular registration. And whether regulatory or other things might limit that in some way, maybe on a country by country basis or region. We even talked specific opcos across, that span across multiple regions. There could be some limitations, as Chris pointed out to that, but the brand wants to make sure that they're not having to kind of replicate the process over and over again, at least at an MNO level, specifically within a country or region.
Yeah, absolutely, and we've heard that exact same thing, Cliff. It's a big issue for the brands. It's a big issue for the ecosystem too. So, and I couldn't agree more that it may have to be done regionally. There may be jurisdictions that require that to be done locally. But I'm sure that as we kind of flesh out that industry, we can find ways to still do that. Maybe the certification needs to be done in, I don't know, Hungary or something. But the ingest point could be more of a global aspect, right? So I think there are ways we can solve that problem and help the brands, because really at the end of the day, when we talk about RCS, we often think of the subscriber, the end user, as the customer here. But really, when you think about it, it's a different model this time around, right? The customer is actually the brand. The subscriber, and not to be crass about it, but is perhaps a little more of the product actually in this. Certainly it's a symbiotic relationship, and certainly a relationship that needs to be a mutually trusted one. But we are, let's just put it this way, we are as much catering to the needs of the brand as we are to the needs of the subscriber. So making it easy for them is very important as well.
Sorry to interrupt, but let me ask then somebody that has been working directly with some of those brands, and I'm referring to Cinch and Robert. You have this view of omni-channel, so there are multiple ways to deliver. How does that fit back to these models? How does the RCS model fits in the omni-channel security system?
Yeah, good question. So first, to add to the conversation we just had, I think as aggregators today, we do a lot of work to, I would say, harmonize across geographies or for our customers, so that a US business wanting to go international, or a European business coming to America, or to Brazil or India or wherever, that they get a cohesive experience to get going with an SMS service in that country. Now, as you know, in SMS there is, I would say, no coordination, more or less, on a national between countries. So there are islands, and many of them in the how what a brand needs to do to go live in every country. And as aggregators, I think one of our rights of existence and where we add value is to simplify this process for the brands. And in this new business messaging paradigm, I see our role continuing as such. Now, we very much welcome a more coordinated backend, if you so will. If you have similar rules across multiple countries or even regions, I would love global. I've never seen that work, so I'm a bit of a, I'm a bit skeptical there. But regions would be a fantastic improvement, and so we're very much for that type of initiative. We're also very much for neutral third parties, essentially assisting the mobile operators to make sure that the brand is who they claim to be. I think that's a positive development. When it then comes to another job that aggregators need to solve now in the new business messaging paradigm is omnichannel, as you said, Dario, because like it or not, there are a lot of OTTs that do significant volumes of A2P and P2A messages, and so there will be, for almost 20 years we've had SMS as the go-to channel. That will no longer be the case. So we'll have RCS and WhatsApp and all those other channels that are out there. So another job that aggregators need to do is also to try to make it easier for brands to work across all of these channels. And obviously RCS is unique in that it consists of many hundreds of mobile operators. Whereas, let's take WhatsApp as an example, it's ultimately Facebook that vet the brands. So there are differences in the rules between what Facebook do and then what various operators decide to do in different places of the globe. And I think if you look at, I think we share an interest on this call to see RCS being a strong competitor in the future business messaging space. So making the onboarding, first of all, aligned as much as possible, so that we don't ask the brand to do 20 different things if they're going to launch in 20 different countries, is important. But then also secondly, the trade-off between an easy onboarding and security, where's the right level? I think getting that one right is super important as well. And also when you look at timing, go to market, I think the most critical piece of success now is to get volume and build scale. So there might also be that, you start at one level, and then, as the traffic on the channel and the usage grows, the verification and security efforts also mature over time. So that's, the way we see the world from a Sinch perspective.
Well, I'd like to play back some of the discussions we've heard so far from Stephen, from Chris, from Sir Robert, to Oscar, which is our representative of the MNO world. So, Oscar, out of some of these themes, the themes of simplifications of the onboarding and federations and so on, what do you think that MNOs are doing right now, and what's your take on these?
I mean, like every ecosystem. I mean, we started by bringing this technology to the market. And I think there were processes that they were not ideal. They were very manual driven. And you know, there is the risk that you don't start and you want to start too big, investing too much money without knowing what customers are gonna need. Now we have much more experience. So, for example, I think key investments in lifecycle APIs that automate the processes and avoid the need of the human intervention, they are key. I mean, at the end of the day, creating this ecosystem of companies that are securing the brands, right? Like authenticating them and making sure that there is not untrusted elements in the ecosystem, then it will help a lot, because basically the number of checks that you need to perform get reduced, because basically checks are done once and then you can scale to many mobile operators. I think ultimately a lot of investments are being done on that, and the more campaigns, the more traffic it goes into RCS, more this process is going to be automated. I mean, I also want to recognize that there are a lot of companies, in this case we have Sinch in here, but there are a lot of messaging partners that are working with brands, and actually they have been going through a modernization process, okay? In terms of the needs that we had for SMS, for example, are not the needs that we need for the channels nowadays. So actually the need of having bots, the need of having frameworks to automate transactions, which is the new trend in messaging and e-commerce. I mean, I think that is going to help as well. So I think operators have invested. Obviously, it can always be better. It can always be better. But I think we are getting there. And I think also messaging partners have improved a lot in terms of having the right tool sets for these, let's say, more e-commerce automated bot transactions that we are having now. Because this is very important as well. We are talking about channel and onboarding the channel, but we are not talking about the need that customers nowadays, sometimes, and when I say customers, I'm referring to the business customers, they want to be hands-on. They want to have the tools. They want to be able to design their bots. They don't want to have anyone in the middle. They internalize even PR agencies in their company. So I would say that these operators are doing part of the job, can improve as well. But I would say that the whole ecosystem has evolved significantly in this journey.
So one step at a time, you say, but we're going down the right path. And that's what I hear.
Definitely. And I mean, I put you an example. When we started in Vodafone like 3 years ago, December, almost 4 years ago. I mean, like we wanted to, basically the process was very controlled, still is, but there is a lot of automation. So basically there was a manual intervention where there had to be a person fully dedicated to execute a campaign. This has disappeared. There is a well-known process. There are right support, and for example, the latest addition that we have done is lifecycle APIs that actually with those partners do we have a significant volume. They can integrate and they can automate the processes. Okay. At the end of the day, that requires a higher level of trust. So I'm not talking about just a mere business relationship, but we are talking about a more profound relationship where we are partners and actually we are taking care both of the customer, the end customer that is targeting this advertisement or who initiates that conversation, and the brands on the other side. Yes, I want to make one final remark on Stephen. It's very important. We say that the customer is the brand. I would say we need to be careful with that. I actually think that the customer, the end customer is king, because at the end of the day, he's the customer of every of us. Okay, and at the end of the day, I think if he does not trust, they don't trust, sorry, the relationship to send messages peer-to-peer, it's going to be very difficult that they trust a relationship for business messages coming on the same channel. So I think is as you, I mean, I'm not disagreeing. You capture it, but I wanted to come back on that. I think we need to level that.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, obviously, if the end user is not comfortable with the experience, if the end user doesn't like the experience, then we have no marketplace. I totally agree with that. I think the point I was just trying to make is that we need to look at essentially both sides of the equation, right? And that's really a lot of what we're talking about today is the consumer is going to be a happy consumer, in my opinion, if they're choosing what content they are getting and then trusting the source of that content, right? And in order to do that, we're going to have to go through this process that we've been talking about, where we're doing the vetting, we're protecting both the brand, because remember now this isn't coming from a 10-digit long code or a common short code or something along those lines. Now we've got the brand. We've got the brand logos, we've got the brand, it's a much more, the brand is much more invested in this messaging. So we've got to find ways to create that trust community, right, on both sides of the equation so that the brand is comfortable and it's easy for the brand, right? Because that's one of the reasons, in the SMS world, 10-digit long codes came along, right? Because in many jurisdictions, the process of getting the short code and getting vetted and going through that process is very difficult, particularly for a small or medium-sized business, right? As opposed to a global brand like Coca-Cola or something along those lines. So what we've got to do is find the right balance, and I think this is what we're all talking about, right? Is finding the right balance between ease of use from the enterprise, ease of use from the customer perspective, but still being completely trusted. As was pointed out earlier, when the standards were built, when those of us who were involved in it were building the standards, that was one of the predicated things that we wanted to do, right? Lessons learned from the SMS world. We need to take that forward, and creating end-to-end, authentication, end-to-end encryption, MSRP over TLS, all of these security aspects were very much front and center in the defining of the spec. And but all of that security, that physical layer security, all of the technical fun that we can do in order to encrypt things, in my opinion, becomes useless if we don't get the vetting process right. Because if you let someone in the front door, they're in the front door. And now they're in the house and you've got a problem. We let that to some extent happen with SMS in many cases, with gray routes and things along the lines that kind of evolved over time. And I think that as we were, developing the standard and thinking about, hey, what did we get wrong with email? What did we get wrong with SMS? What did we get wrong with MMS? I think a lot of that is in there, but the onus is then either on the operator, which in my personal belief is not where I think it belongs, for many reasons, including liability. But if we can get a independent vetting process started and moving forward, then I think that takes the onus off that and ensures that the brands are happy because they're working with one or a small number of either global or regional players, and the consumer is happy because just like when he goes to in the U.S. to Citibank on the web, right? In most browsers, it turns green. You've got the little lock there. I know I'm talking to Citibank and I trust that. We've got to create that same mechanism within RCS so that the consumer is always aware that they're trusted. I mean, I gave a good example when I was talking to to Dario the other day, and I was, my wife got a text message, right, from the bank, and was questioning something or other, whatever. And the first reaction is to delete the text message and go to the actual bank on the web or call them from their known number, right? Because that's what happens when the medium becomes untrusted, right?
And the real scary thing for telecommunication to tell, please don't send a message, please don't answer them. That's showing that something is not working.
Yeah.
Let me then ask then, Chris, if this is what talking about was trade-off and setting up a possible verification mechanism, as Steve was saying, that works. How far are we? Can we tell our brands that things are ready and to go?
I want to just speak to something Steve said for a second. Another good example of this, call the known number and not what you find on the internet. And I just want to relate this to P2A. We haven't really talked much about search and a user's ability to find a brand and to be able to know that they found a real brand and it's a trustable brand. In the internet today, the fraudsters are promoting their own customer care numbers as those of legitimate brands and paying the fees so they show up early on the search. And users and consumers are falling for this hook, line, and sinker in droves. They're searching for the customer care number. They see it on the internet. That must be right. They call the number. It's a fraudster. We have to make sure the same thing is not going to happen in P2A, where we let brands come in without rigor and they can advertise themselves in the search results of the directory and users can find them and be defrauded. This is really critical. Now, to your question, yes, iConnective can speak for itself. We're ready to engage with the brands and their partners, like people on this call, on independent verification, fully AI, API-based, automated. There will be some fallout. We'll deal with that. It will have to mature. We'll deal with that as well. But we're absolutely ready to start verifying brands and enabling them with that trust token on every operator that would support us as their VA, all automatically. So that makes for much reduced friction to the brand. And we've gone to a great extent to keep the amount of brand effort to a minimum, but not to a zero, because there is a second factor authentication that's prudent to undertake. So we do that. But other than that, the brand has very little friction and can reach any network which it wishes to operate where that MNO in question has supported iConnective as the verification authority. So all this is ready to go. We're keen to get into live trials as opposed to interoperability lab testing and see this progress to a launch.
Yeah, and I would add real quick, just so we get it out there, that Interop in partnership with Cineverse is also fully engaged in the space and ready to go as well. One of the, from a technical perspective, one of the things that we're going to have to work through in the short run here is the capabilities of the actual map platforms to be able to use third-party tokens, right? That's something that I know certainly at Interop in our platform, we are capable of that. So that's good news. But there are some out there who are in various states of readiness for that. So that's something we're going to have to work through. And I think what you were talking about, of course, was getting some interoperability testing going and doing things along those lines. I think that's the next critical step here. Yeah, I would agree entirely.
Steve, to that point, I mean, we found that one of the map platforms didn't fully appreciate the nature of cryptographic tokens. When you verify a token, you should be climbing the certificate chain all the way to the root, that supported the VA. And when you're a VA, you are the root of trust for your tokens, and you must have a certificate chain, but the map must traverse it and find itself at a legitimate VA and it must know which of all the VAs it must know all of the VAs that are legitimate, because when it climbs that certificate path and finds itself at the root, is that root one of the bona fide VAs that is trustable, right? So this is something maps have not all done, all in sort of the same level of maturity. And that's just one of dozens of things that we'll have to get ironed out through Interon.
I couldn't agree with you more on any of those points, actually.
One thing I would add to I think it comes back to kind of like this theme between what Robert said earlier, what you said, Steve, and Chris and Oscar, which is, there's, especially to the brand, we can't get into a position with RCS where we repeat the sins of the past, and more importantly, we can't get into a situation where it becomes overly obtuse to brand to engage. Even Robert spoke a little bit about the omni-channel and the fact that there are multiple channels now supported by large pass providers, right? Where, RCS will be one of the channels amongst maybe, OTT or voice or other things. And I think, at least iConnective has taken the stance that the omni-channel should be supported overall when a brand wants to engage, right? So that they shouldn't have to go through this rigorous process for each channel, even like if there's an opportunity to push across the board, because again, usually a brand comes to the table and says, hey, I want to do X, or my goal is X. And you try to get them as a vendor, messaging vendor, to the mark. And so I think as we look at this, I think that where things could get, overly burdensome, we've tried to remove a lot of that burden, again, as Chris pointed out of the process. But then also make sure that the velocity, especially as we get to scale, is supported, and we're not ended up in hangups. Again, not trying to repeat some of the sins of the past that's happened in traditional messaging, where again things got overly laborious for the brand to engage. And so we see that as a key tenet into our approach to this. It's one of the reasons why we've developed the APIs and other things that we've had, and are working on some of those third-party integrations you're talking about, to be able to send the tokens over automatically and that sort of thing.
So I think it needs to be recognized that there are, in the SMS world, a huge difference between how America works and how the rest of the world works. Where America has a model which essentially is very close to this, what we're talking about here today. At least on the short code side, there's been a gray market on codes in America for sure, but on the short code side, individually by the 4 big carriers, people are getting vetted essentially and onboarded. Whereas in most of the rest of the world, you get a connection to an aggregator and you get going. That's a huge difference in culture and expectation from how it's been the past a decade or more. So I think we need to recognize that as well. There's fundamentally different cultures in how this will be done, which I think could also have an impact on how MNOs choose to go about, vetting RCS bots, how, third-party VAs need to go about providing service in different countries.
Mm-hmm.
And Robert, one quick question from my side is, are some of those brands you've been talking to as an interface, are they asking directly for security as an add-on? Are they worried about security?
You mean in rich messaging or RCS?
Yeah.
Sure, it is a factor, but it's still very early market. So I think the first question is probably user base, and then just getting the head around technology. That's where I think the market is today, which doesn't mean that this doesn't come as the third or fourth question. And understanding the increased security that RCS provides is, definitely on the plus side when brands evaluate, not perhaps if, but when do I invest? When do I, cross the chasm from 160 characters to, full rich media messaging?
Great. Well, I know that time-wise, we probably need to start wrapping up. So I'd like to ask each one of you if you have a suggestion, starting with maybe suggestion for brands and for mobile operators, one each, but two small things to tell everybody about securing the RCS and the rich communication channels as well. I was starting from Oscar. Oscar, what would be your suggestions?
I mean, I would say that we have an ecosystem which is ready to protect their interest and their end customers, that provide a superior experience. And as all of us have presented in this call, we have currently the means, and we are working in even improving those to make your journey even easier. So actually, I would say that the message is ready, is there. And talking about reach, I would recommend to check the figures, because if I'm not wrong, I'm a technical guy in the end. I can reach, at least from my backend, 400 million customers, okay, for peer-to-peer. And I'm pretty sure that there are the associated map platforms to reach all those customers. So yeah, and I'm probably not reaching to everyone because I'm not interconnected to everyone. So maybe you have a great opportunity there, and we are ready for you. That would be my message.
Okay, so let me ask Stephen then. And Stephen, what would be your suggestion?
Well, just based on everything that we've talked about today, I think that I don't know if it's a suggestion or a comment. I would agree with Oscar that the ecosystem is by and large ready. We've got at least the initial deployments all done. The map platforms are in place. Working on interconnect and interoperability, particularly from a map-to-map platform perspective. But I mean, just as a comment, not necessarily to the brand or to the operator, but to both. I do believe that as we've said throughout the conversation, trust is the key, right? We've made, by hook or by crook, we've made some errors in the past. I don't use email very much anymore, right? Your point at the beginning of the conversation. Why is that? It's cluttered. Everything that can be done must be done in order to keep this ecosystem clean, because at the end of the day, that's the value to the enterprise and the consumer. The enterprise, the only reason you have really high click-through rates and really high response rates on RCS is because it's trusted. It's because there is not noise in the channel. So the best thing we can do both for the consumer and the enterprise is resist the temptation, if you will, to put noise in that channel.
And Cliff, what's your suggestion for brands out there?
Yeah, so I think it boils down really to the key word that Oscar talked about, right? Which is to protect, not only the consumer, but protect the brand and their image and their ultimately their persona, and go into market over RCS. And as long as we kind of keep that protection in place, again, for the brand and the consumer, everything in between, it will basically grease the skids, right? Like the revenues will come, the subscribers will use RCS and be happy with it as a medium for a long, long time. And I think it's important to note that brands in the internet world, right? They basically pay for that trust. They pay, to have a certificate that, has denoted them as they being who they said that they were, so that the consumer trusts when they go to the website via that little lock logo or what have you. And again, I think as long as we keep that protection moniker in mind as we move forward and trust in this channel, then I think there's going to be a thriving ecosystem for a long time.
Fantastic. Robert from Sinch, what would you say you suggest to your clients coming to?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I would say to the ecosystem, Rome wasn't built in a day. Start with something pragmatic that works today, so that this topic doesn't become a blocker for launch. And then develop better solutions as we go along with higher degrees of automation, technical solutions, etc. So manual is fine. Trusting the existing ecosystem of partners such as Cinch and others is fine to get going. And then there's lots of people with a lot of great solutions out there, and the carriers can kind of upgrade over time, unless they're ready, and then you can go the full way or to begin with. But that tends not to be my experience from things. And we also have to understand we're not operating in a vacuum. That there is a lot of other alternatives for enterprises to message their customers. So we need to make this channel attractive to the brands. Otherwise, they will go elsewhere. And this, a good and solid, secure and easy onboarding, simple and robust, they are in conflict, but we need to get both right. Especially as we are essentially a federation of ultimately 1,000 MNOs and many, many, many service providers versus other ecosystems which are, totally centralized by one single company. That would be my closing words.
Suggestion. And more closing words from Chris. And Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I really like what Robert just said there, and I totally agree that the brand should start with something incremental to what they do today. I think that messaging partners or the cloud partners, many of them have evolved to multi-channel cloud partners, is the right place to start. But a brand should appreciate that as they get good at using RCS and engaging consumers, and there's an outcome that's beneficial to them, they could be going to contact centers and they could be going to digital media firms. Because this is now all IP technology, the reach to an MNO is much easier than the old days where these special rails were in place for messaging. So the world opens up to them, but I really do think they should start with incrementally what have they been doing with people like Cinch and others. On the operator side, I would just say on a few occasions, we've talked to operators who said maybe they won't require verification of all the brands, right? So in those cases, I want to make a suggestion. You should watch what that brand does very closely. You should not allow it to do anything in volume, and you should be careful that nothing goes awry, because the MNO has a brand as well and a reputation. And again, trust is hard fought but easily lost. So we can't afford to see even a few of those MNOs and a bad experience can go viral and become, a reputation issue for even the best MNO. So we want to be very careful that if any of the community decide to be expedient with what seems to be a smaller brand, then they're very careful what they let happen there. Otherwise, we're all going to suffer the consequences of the genie out of the bottle.
Well, great. I think we have a few food for thought, definitely a few ideas in there, and a lot of I congratulations each other that the fact that, first of all, RCS is actively, from the beginning, starting to look at security. And so from my side and from MEF side, I'm very happy to see that this is a debate that starts now. At the same time, as Oscar, as Robert, as Chris and Steve said, is one step at a time. Rome is not built in a day, I've heard. So, but being engaging in these topic and in these specifics of securing RCS and messaging as a whole seems to be a very important step. So I'd like to thank you all for participating today. Thank you for helping us to understand a bit more. Thank you everybody out there that has been listening as well, because I think you're doing the right thing. by paying attention and taking notes on this important topic as well. So this is the third day for the RCS event and the MEF Connects for us for rich communication. So thanks for staying for so much of the events we've seen so far. We love your feedback, and definitely we'll come back and talk to you about securing this channel and anything that happens around it. Thank you again, and we'll speak to you all soon. Bye-bye.